Secretary of State. This is the nation's chief diplomat, representing the United States to every other government on Earth and managing embassies in more than 170 countries. The Secretary of State ranks first in the Cabinet's order of succession, behind the Vice President and the leaders of Congress. A position that reflects how central foreign policy has been to American power since the earliest days of the Republic. Every treaty negotiation, every diplomatic crisis, every foreign visit begins inside this department. Why does rank matter here? Because if the President and Vice President were both suddenly unable to serve, the constitutional line of succession runs directly through this office. Next among the Cabinet, Secretary of the Treasury. This is the person who manages the entire financial machinery of the federal government, from printing currency to collecting taxes to managing the national debt. The Treasury Department also oversees sanctions against foreign governments and individuals, giving this secretary enormous quiet power over global finance without ever firing a weapon. This department also houses the Internal Revenue Service, which means every tax return filed in the country ultimately answers to this one office. Every dollar the government spends, borrows, or taxes eventually touches this department. Secretary of Defense. This is the civilian leader of the entire United States military, overseeing the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Space Force from the Pentagon. This position sits directly above the Joint Chiefs of Staff, meaning even the highest-ranking generals in the country answer to a civilian appointee rather than a military officer. That single detail is one of the most important safeguards in the entire American system of government, ensuring the military never operates independently of elected civilian authority. The Secretary of Defense also controls the largest budget of any federal department by a wide margin, funding everything from aircraft carriers to military housing to overseas bases in dozens of countries. Should a general ever be able to bypass this office and act alone? The founders answered that question explicitly, and the answer was no. Attorney General. This is the head of the Department of Justice and the chief law enforcement officer of the federal government, overseeing the FBI, the DEA, and every federal prosecutor in the country. Unlike most cabinet officials, the Attorney General is expected to maintain a degree of independence from the President on individual legal matters, a norm that has been tested repeatedly throughout American history. Legal scholars have long debated exactly how independent this office should be, since the Attorney General is simultaneously the President's lawyer and the enforcer of laws that sometimes apply to the President directly. Is that tension a flaw in the system? Most constitutional scholars would say it is actually the point. Secretary of the Interior. This is the steward of nearly 500 million acres of federal public land, overseeing national parks, wildlife refuges, and relations with federally recognized tribal nations. Almost every national park you have ever visited and every offshore drilling lease you have ever heard about in the news falls under this single department's jurisdiction. Secretary of Agriculture. This is the official responsible for the nation's entire food supply chain, from farm subsidies to food safety inspections to the National School Lunch Program. Every crop insurance payment, every meat inspection stamp, every rural development loan connects back to this department. Secretary of Commerce. This is the cabinet position focused on economic growth, overseeing everything from the national census to patent registration to international trade promotion. The Commerce Department also houses the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, meaning this single office touches both your weather forecast and your business's trademark filing. Secretary of Labor. This is the official who enforces workplace safety standards, minimum wage laws, and unemployment insurance programs across the entire country. Every workplace injury report, every wage dispute investigation, every union election dispute eventually crosses this department's desk. Secretary of Health and Human Services. This is the head of the department responsible for public health, medical research funding, and the operation of Medicare and Medicaid. This one office oversees the Food and Drug Administration, the Centers for Disease Control, and the National Institutes of Health all at once, giving it authority over nearly every major American health crisis in the past century. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. This is the position responsible for federal housing policy, mortgage insurance programs, and efforts to reduce homelessness in American cities. Every Federal Housing Administration loan you have ever heard of traces back to this department's authority, Secretary of Transportation. This is the cabinet official overseeing highways, aviation safety, railways, and maritime transportation across the entire country. Every time an airplane is grounded for safety reasons or a major highway bill passes Congress, this department is directly involved. Secretary of Energy. This is the position responsible for the nation's energy policy and, less obviously, the maintenance and security of America's nuclear weapons stockpile. That second responsibility often surprises people, since most assume nuclear weapons fall entirely under the Department of Defense, when in fact their physical maintenance is a Department of Energy function. Secretary of Education. This is the official overseeing federal education policy, student financial aid programs, and enforcement of civil rights laws in schools receiving federal funding. Every federal student loan you have ever taken out passes through programs this department administers. Secretary of Veterans Affairs. This is the head of the department providing health care, disability benefits, and burial services to former members of the armed forces. This department runs the largest integrated healthcare system in the entire United States, serving millions of veterans through hospitals and clinics nationwide. Secretary of Homeland Security. This is the newest cabinet position, created after the attacks of September 11, 2001, to consolidate border security, disaster response, and counterterrorism efforts under one department. Former Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff has spoken publicly about how difficult it was to merge 22 previously separate agencies into a single functioning department almost overnight. This position sits last in the cabinet order of succession, a direct reflection of how recently the department itself was created. 15 people sit at the table with the president. Almost nobody can name more than 4 of them. Each one runs an entire department of the federal government, controlling budgets larger than most countries. Now here's what almost nobody realizes about this list. The cabinet is not actually fixed at 15. Presidents can grant cabinet-level rank to other officials, including the White House Chief of Staff, the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, and the United States Trade Representative. Even though these positions are not created by the same statutes as the 15 executive departments, that means the exact size and shape of the cabinet can shift slightly from one administration to the next, even though the 15 department secretaries remain constant. There is another detail that rarely gets attention. Every single cabinet secretary requires Senate confirmation before taking office, giving Congress direct leverage over who ultimately runs each department. Political historian Doris Kearns Goodwin has written extensively about how presidents have used cabinet appointments strategically, sometimes selecting former rivals specifically to keep dangerous political competition close and accountable. That strategy has a name in American political history, and it is older than most people assume. Abraham Lincoln is the example historians return to most often. Having filled his own cabinet with men who had run against him for the presidential nomination just months earlier, what does this mean for you? It means the next time a headline says, "The administration announced a new policy," you now know exactly which department and which person actually holds the authority behind that announcement. Immigration enforcement points to Homeland Security. Interest rate commentary points to Treasury. A new national park designation points to the Interior Department. The presidency is not one person making every decision alone. It is 15 departments, each run by a Senate-confirmed secretary executing policy across nearly every part of American life. 15 people sit at the table with the president. Now you can name every single one of them, and more importantly, you understand exactly why each seat exists.